Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about specifically what it means to have your Mars in Capricorn or Mars in the 10th house. My name is Brandon. This is part of a much larger series that I'm working on where I go over every single planet and every single sign and house. And this is particularly just the Capricorn and 10th house week. So I have done every planet between the Sun and Saturn in every sign and house prior to Capricorn and the 10th house. So there's a playlist down below. You're welcome to check that out to see if you have any of those placements prior to Capricorn and prior to the 10th house, but you more than likely do it at this point. And I would highly recommend that you check that out, just kind of get a better idea. Otherwise, if this is your placement, you have Mars in Capricorn, Mars in the 10th house, this video is also for you. Or if you know someone with this placement, this video is also for you. Now, I do have a couple things to say before we get started. One, if you're sitting there like, what's going on? What is this man talking about? I don't understand any of this. Do I have Mars? Mars is in what, right? All these different things. I really urge you to look down below. There's a link down there you can check out to really generate your own specific birth chart to see if you have your Mars in Capricorn or Mars in the 10th house and all these different things. You can kind of get a better idea of what's going on within your chart. And then, of course, also, everything down below, I'm going to have timestamps too. So I'm going to be talking about different segments at different times. So I'll be talking about Mars specifically in astrology first and foremost. And then I'll be talking about Mars in Capricorn and then Mars in the 10th house. So those are timestamps down below. So you can skip to whatever part you have as well. Feel free to do that. And then, of course, this is YouTube. You know how YouTube works. If you like the video, it lets people know that, you know, I'm doing good things with YouTube. I love doing this. So if you like my stuff, like, comment, share, subscribe, all those things are going to help me because this is what I love to do. This is what I do. So yeah, and I'm really appreciative to be here. So that's pretty much all of the kind of stuff out of the way. And then, of course, if you're interested in anything with me, my stuff is down below as well to reach out to me on my socials. So all that aside, let's talk about specifically what Mars means in astrology. Okay, so Mars in astrology. Mars as a planet is considered to be a little aggravating, a little difficult, a little hard to work with. Mars is everything that has to do with our willpower, our energy, what we accomplish in a day, what we are motivated by, what gets us up in the morning, what makes us want to fight, what turns us on, right? That's all of what Mars is all kind of pertaining to. It has to do with the warrior kind of archetype, the ability to go after our goals and to utilize our energy. It's very much this kind of, pursuance of energy. It has to do with anything that's heated, anything that's cut, anything that is severed. So Mars has a lot of those sorts of kind of correlations associated with. And wherever Mars is by sign and by house, it's going to kind of show you what you're motivated by, as well as what area of life you are specifically trying to work towards. And so Mars really has a lot to do with inspiration and a lot to do with your action and how you're really wanting to go after things. It does also have areas of life that can be more difficult or can feel like more of a challenge, more of a battle, right? Because Mars is all about that fighting kind of spirit in that regard and kind of really having this kind of like inner battle, outer battle. And so wherever Mars is at, you'll kind of see Mars wanting to really fight for whatever that specific sign is, as well as whatever that specific house is. And so Mars really kind of brings up very different things about how we utilize our energy, how we go after our goals. And Mars really wants us to understand the importance of our energy, the importance of conflict, right? Mars also can show us how we address conflict, how we relate to conflict, as well as just how we relate to just male energy in general is very Martian. And there's a lot of connections with physical vitality, physical health, working out, anything that is like martial arts or sports, or anything that is very physically exhaustive is very Martian in nature. And so, as well as everything that's very motivating and inspiring, and very, driving towards things, driving forces towards things, right? Whatever is able to push things forward is very Martian. When something needs to be done, you get a very strong Martian person that can kind of push that kind of angle forward, right? So that's something I think needs to be kind of said about where Mars is at. Obviously, Mars rules different signs in the chart. So Mars naturally rules Aries and Scorpio, and it is considered to be exalted in the sign of Capricorn, which is the sign we're going to be talking about today. And so any of those signs opposite of those three are going to struggle in their own ways. So if Mars is in a Venus-ruled sign, so it would be Mars in either Taurus or Libra, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. It's going to struggle in its own ways. I've already done videos on those, so you're welcome to check those out. And then Mars in Capricorn is the exalted kind of Mars, meaning that it functions very well. It's kind of put to like the top of its field, those sorts of things. The opposite sign of that, Mars in Cancer, is where Mars can really struggle for its own sort of pitfalls that it kind of falls into, because Mars and Cancer are kind of more, they're not really that compatible in regards to how they utilize their energy. They're kind of discordant in that sort of way, versus Mars and Capricorn, Mars and Saturn, they work really well in that own kind of way that it's done. And I'll get to that in a second. So, but I do also want to say that, and I want to talk about this as well with the Mars Capricorn portion, obviously, and I said this with the Mars Cancer, as well as Mars Libra, as well as Mars Scorpio. All these Mars placements, a lot of the time when you look online and you see people talk about their, the thoughts that they have about their Mars placement or whatever, it's pretty negative when you see that people have Mars in Cancer. Like when you look that up, a lot of astrologers will be like, oh, that's not good, right? And it's hard because whenever Mars is in dignity or in any sort of that dignity spectrum that I just kind of laid out there, so whether it's in Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, or Scorpio, it's going to have a lot more expression. It's going to want to express more, whether that's because it's in its own kind of sign, that's because it's exalted, or it's in a sign that's opposite of that and it's uncomfortable, right? It's very much something that the Martian lessons, when it's in exaltation, in fall, in domicile, whatever, and this is true for every planet, not just Mars, that those lessons become even stronger. So that when you have a very strong Mars, yes, there's a lot of hard work that you will be doing with a Mars in Capricorn. And a lot of hard work you'll be doing relative to Martian themes, but that's because the Mars is so prominent. So it's almost like really bringing in that lesson of, okay, I gotta go after my goals, I gotta do this thing, I gotta work for this, I gotta work for that, right? So don't allow the discourse online to really, the way people view debilitations and exaltations and domicile placements. People will view them and speak on them in a way that they are just, they're the best thing ever, and they're all these different things. And Mars can be in Capricorn. It can function very poorly. Granted, it's not always going to do that, and it's not as likely to do that as other Mars placements would, but it can still function poorly. And I think it's about understanding the entirety of the chart, because that's the thing. I think a lot of people will isolate, oh, you have a Mars in Capricorn, so you must be super, super successful. And I've seen Mars in Capricorn that are not, that are really struggling and have really struggled. And that's its own thing. But point is I think that there's a lot of different opinions about domicile, dignity, exaltation kind of placements, and I think it's really important to understand that when you're on that spectrum in any sort of way, you are essentially going to be that lesson will be a lot stronger of that planet, and understand that that's just the way that we're compartmentalized in astrology. And I think a lot of people get stuck on that too much, as opposed to just seeing the rest in the entirety of the chart. So that's all I have to say about that. I'm going to kind of reiterate that in the Mars Capricorn portion, but I just want to let you know all those things about like the dignity domicile spectrum thing. So that's it for that. I'll see you guys in the next part. We're talking about specifically Mars in Capricorn. Okay, so Mars in Capricorn. So when we have Mars in the sign of Capricorn, like I had mentioned in the previous portion, Mars is considered to be exalted, okay? Now, I have said this in all of the Mars videos that were on the dignity spectrum, whether it was Mars in Scorpio, Mars in Libra, Mars in Taurus, Mars in Aries, and Mars in Cancer. And I think what's really important, and what's really important to recognize with this specific placement, is that when it's in, when a planet is in somewhere on that spectrum, no matter where it's at, but I think more so when it's exalted, it makes the lessons of that planet almost even stronger, because that planet is so strong, right? If we have the planet of our willpower and our energy and our drive and our ambition so strongly placed, that means that a lot of our lessons are likely going to be around utilizing that, and utilizing that well, and being efficient with our energy, and being, consistent with our energy. And I think when it comes to Mars in other domicile dignity kind of things, that we can tend to see that Mars will be a big prominent lesson. You'll find anger management really strong in people that have really strong Mars. You'll find physical vitality and needing to work out, utilize their energy, utilize like something to go after. They need to consistently be doing something, kind of this workhorse energy, right? And so I think that's something that needs to be brought up. And I find that with Mars and Capricorn, it's funny because it's interesting when we think about Mars and Capricorn versus Mars and Cancer, because when we talk about astrology and the way that a lot of astrologers do, and we try and fit things into boxes, and this idea of exaltation and debilitation and all those things come up, there's a lot of disempowerment and empowerment that can come through that perspective of whether, someone comes in and they look up and they have Mars and Cancer and they're like, oh, and it just makes them feel worse about themselves. Or they have Mars and Capricorn and that makes them feel way better about themselves, right? There's kind of these kind of extremes that you tend to see in the verbiage and the way that astrologers speak on exaltation, debilitation, those sorts of things. And I think what's really important is to recognize that Mars in Capricorn is part of that. It's part of that kind of discourse and the way that people talk about it, where it's almost like so elevated and it's almost so empowered that people that look it up and realize that they have Mars in Capricorn, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. But now they almost, and this technically is very on brand for Mars and Capricorn, can feel more pressure to do more things. Because like, oh, if my Mars is so well placed, I don't have an excuse. I don't have an astrological excuse, right? And people will use that. It's a whole thing. Point I'm making is that don't use the astrology as an excuse for poor behavior, poor choices. Don't utilize that. You can, but it's about transmuting that, changing that. And like I said earlier, I know people that have Mars in Capricorn that are not successful. It happens. They have really crappy Marses, even if it is in Capricorn, and there's other things in the chart that play into this factor. And it's really important to look at the entirety of the chart, what else is going on, what is a lot of the lessons relative to this specific natal chart that everyone has that is specifically different and specifically unique. So be very aware of the perspective that you're giving in, that you're taking in as it relates to Mars and Capricorn, as it relates to any placement you have that may be on that spectrum of debilitation, dignity, those sorts of things. Because I think it's just really important and crucial to understand that. Now, Mars in Capricorn, the reason why it is considered to be exalted is because we put Mars, the warrior, in the sign of the soul of the general, and the one that is able to kind of run the shots and tell you what to do. And so we find that when we put a soldier that wants to go to war and wants to fight, we put them in line with the general that tells them what to do. They get stuff done. Okay. Now, Mars can do a lot of things. And the things I find really interesting about Mars in Capricorn, from what I've experienced, I don't have Mars in Capricorn, I have Mars in Scorpio, is that they have a way of doing things that that is efficient in its own sense, but it might not, because it's an earth sign, it may not think about, and this is very much like my Mars in Scorpio, the Mars in water, may not think about like the emotional kind of undercurrents in that, the other kind of factors within that part of the, whoever it may be. So Mars in Capricorn, great for like business, great for like leadership, being your own boss, being your own CEO, climbing the corporate ladder, working on long-term goals. Great placement for that. Personally, it can have a little bit of issues. Because when we have planets in Capricorn, it's almost like everything all the time is like business. And so when you get into the personal life of those people that have Mars in Capricorn, they might treat you like a business or treat you like a business partner in that regard. And it's about being able to separate that and kind of understand how to know how to work with the business external world stuff as well as the internal world stuff. Because when Mars is in Capricorn, it's so strong and it knows how to work in the external world, and it may not necessarily know how to work in the internal motivations, what's motivating it. So that's the thing I think it's really interesting when we think about that kind of dichotomy between Mars in Capricorn, Mars in Cancer, because Mars in Capricorn is utilizing the external world to inform it of what it needs to do. So it's very much the idea of like extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation, because extrinsic is like Mars in Capricorn is motivated by the external circumstances. Mars in Scorpio Mars in Cancer is motivated by the internal kind of stirring and all those sorts of feelings. And those can change, and so can external things, right? So that's why it's really interesting to see how those kind of balance one another. And so it's very interesting to kind of navigate how Mars moves in Capricorn as well as Mars in Cancer, because I really think that there's so much extrinsic, externalized focus for Mars in Capricorn, unless they have other things like Cancer placements or a really strong moon or whatever, that kind of forces that internalized kind of introspective nature. A lot of Virgo placements can help this too, where they're striving for something, but they're not knowing why they're striving for it outside of proving something. That's the thing that's really interesting about Capricorn. They have a lot of lessons around proving something, long-term goals, kind of holding such a long-term vision in mind and consistently working at it day in and day out, over and over and over again to reach that goal. Mars in Capricorn understands the consistent use of will and the consistent use of every day. I have to do this thing, I have to wake up, do this thing, do this thing, do this thing, and it works out for them, right? So Mars really wants to achieve, and it will achieve, especially in the sign of Capricorn. It will achieve something, and the thing is too, Mars can be in Capricorn. It could be in like the 3rd house or in the 4th house, and it can achieve things that are more private, but they're really achieving things in that area of life. And that's why it's important to see where Mars is at in the house as well as in the sign, and in specific with Mars and Capricorn, you're going to see a lot of movement in that specific house. Now, the thing that's interesting about exaltation is that when we talk about houses, kind of what I'm getting at right now, when Mars is exalted in a house, it's going to make the themes of that house a little bit different than it would be if it was domicile, meaning in its own sign. Because, for example, if we have Mars in Aries or Mars in Scorpio, in that Aries and Scorpio house, Mars is there. So it's like the person that lives in that house is there managing that house, right? Versus Mars in Capricorn, Mars does not rule Capricorn. Saturn rules Capricorn, okay? So I think that's why it's a little bit different, because when we put Mars in the house of, in the sign of Capricorn and subsequently in the house of Capricorn, what ends up happening is that we put, both the Aries and Scorpio houses are going to be connected to that Capricorn house, right? Really strongly. And it's almost like we put, the landlord living in the house that he owns, right? That can almost be like kind of the idea of Mars and Capricorn, where it runs the shots, but it's also living there, right? So it's kind of this, and I think that's part of the reason of why I think Mars and Capricorn can struggle as it relates to the house placement, because of the fact that Mars does not rule Capricorn. Saturn rules Capricorn. And so when Mars is when a planet's in its own sign, it protects the themes of that house. So, for example, if you have a Venus-ruled 10th house and you have Venus in the 10th house, in that sign of the 10th house, it's going to protect your reputation. It's going to protect that stuff. In the same vein, if you have, Sun, let's just say Sun on the ascendant, and your Leo Sun on the ascendant, Leo Sun, Leo rising, right? Then you have your Sun protecting your identity, right? There's a lot of other instances how that can play out, but overall, the planet in its own sign is going to protect the theme of that house. And so I think that's why when Mars is in Capricorn, it knows how to get to those things. It knows how to reach those goals. It knows how to strive for those things. But it's pulling from the Aries house and the Scorpio house for those themes. And it's pulling from its own internal kind of desires as well as kind of the more undercurrents of what's going on. And I think there's a lot of power with Mars. There's always a lot of power with Mars and Capricorn, but I think it's about really being aware of that internal motivation and really sitting with that. And I find a lot of Mars and Capricorn I know that have a chart that is so prominent and striving for so many different things, right? But they also will likely have like a very intrinsic kind of internalized, introspective kind of chart as well. So it's important to balance those two is what I'm getting at. Like understand what you are really wanting to do, what you really want to get out of life and go after it. And the thing that's important too, obviously because your Mars is so strong, look to your Venus as well to see what's going on there, to get kind of balancing act of what's going on with in regards to like your own Mars-Venus battle, right? Because you can be really great at initiating things, going after things, but you don't necessarily know what you want, what you value, what you want out of a relationship, out of how you want to make your money, those sorts of things. And that's why the Venus is really important to balance as well. Now, onto the Capricorn part of all this, more specifically, Mars in Capricorn, it's very important to look at your Saturn sign as well, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So typically what's going to happen if you have your Mars in Capricorn is prior to your Saturn return, you're going to be really hardworking. You're going to be kind of consistently doing things, consistently trying to uphill battle, fighting for whatever it is that Mars and Capricorn's want you to fight for. And then you reach your Saturn return, and that weight is kind of lifted off of you, and you feel so much more assured and confident, and like, okay, now I've accomplished all these things. Now I'm good, right? Now I'm perfect, right? So there's a lot of power in Mars and Capricorn, but that power takes time to build. But the thing about Capricorn placements, and I said this about the Sun in Capricorn, is when you build it, it's strong. Like when you complete it, it's strong, right? So that's the thing with Mars and Capricorn. Work on that routine. Work on that physical vitality too, like making sure that you're having like a lot of movement with your body, a lot of caretaking with your own energy. Like working out a lot is really important when your Mars is quite strong. And find an outlet for your anger as well. Now, because Capricorn also rules like the father figure, it also rules, these kind of authoritative kind of figures as well, whomever we are led by, as well as our boss and CEOs, all that stuff, right? The kind of top-down structures. When we put Mars here, there can be fights with like with the father, or with the boss, or with just society in general. There could be this kind of uphill battle where you feel like you're fighting against some higher power, but the higher power is typically a boss or someone that's externally affecting you. Especially because Mars is also an Earth sign, so there typically is like a grounded reality or financial aspect of this, or resource aspect of this. And then Mars in a cardinal sign, what's interesting about this is Mars in a cardinal sign, all of the cardinal Marses are somewhere on the dignity spectrum. So Mars wants to do things. Mars wants to accomplish things. Mars wants to go after things. And so cardinal is all about this starting new things, planting new seeds, going and kind of initiating different stuff, right? And when we put Mars in a cardinal sign, it's going to want to do those things, right? Yes, it's going to be motivated by different things, right? Whether it's Mars or Venus in Aries or Taurus, or whether it's the moon or Saturn with Cancer or Capricorn, but it's going to want to start different things, right? When it's in Capricorn in specific, it's going to want to start things that are going to stay for a very long time. So you can find Mars in Capricorn planting seeds that they know are going to grow fruit many, 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 many years from them. But they have to keep watering it, they have to keep maintaining it, they have to keep working at it. And that's something you'll see with Mars in Capricorn, is a long, steady journey towards that, whatever that goal is, whatever that top of pinnacle of career is that they want, they're going to get it. But it's going to take a long time to get there, and they're going to have to go through all these different battles. And that's why it's also important to see what Mars is doing by house as well as aspects. There's a lot of different layers with this. And that's why I think it's important to get a full, a full kind of natal chart reading to kind of get a better idea of why Mars is trying to have you strive towards these specific things, right? Because Mars really wants to create a really conflict positive relationship, where you're able to say, okay, no, this needs to be accomplished. Let's get this done, because I know it's going to be harder on future me if I do it, if I don't do it now, right? That's something you'll tend to see with Mars and Capricorn. There is this kind of aggravation towards too much work. So the thing with Mars Capricorn, because it is so strong, it can put too much on its plate. It can push itself too far. It can exhaust itself, because yes, Mars in Capricorn understands the limits. At the same time, it also is kind of steadily testing that. And so it's like, okay, we got to keep working. So you can be exhausted and still get a lot of work done, right? And that's the thing with Mars Capricorn, Mars Saturn. They're both this kind of idea of really going after something for a long time, like really building something for such a long, consistent amount of time, to the point that you just can't, you can't quit it, right? You can't quit what you're doing. And there's a lot of loyalty with Mars and Capricorn as well, because when they commit to an action, they commit to a goal, they will make sure that goal is seen, and they'll put all the steps in action. And that's why it's also important to have some supportive Virgo placements, because I find Virgo and Capricorn support each other really, really well. Taurus does too, but that's because there's kind of this support of kind of the values, the internalized kind of, what you want, where you want to go, those sorts of things. And then Virgo is kind of all the kind of planning to get you towards the Capricorn, right? And so I really think if you have your Mars in Capricorn, it's about utilizing your own energy, utilizing your own willpower, going after your goals, being really strategic, and really patient with how long things take, right? And the patience with Mars in Capricorn versus Mars in Scorpio, because let's be honest, I don't think Mars in Aries has much patience. And that's not like a jab at Mars in Aries. It's just, I find Mars in Aries, they'll do a lot of things. They really, really will. And I know a very, very prominent Mars in Aries friend of mine who is always striving. And she definitely has a long-term goal, but it's almost like she just kind of has a little bit of impulse with that, which is fine. She has a lot of different things that she's doing. Now, Mars in Scorpio and Mars in Capricorn, there is a lot of loyalty. There's a lot of consistency. There's a lot of kind of grudges in that regard. And kind of like Mars in Scorpio will hold an emotional grudge. They'll kind of use their emotions as fuel. Speaking from experience, I have done that quite often in my own life. Versus Mars in Capricorn, they will kind of use their glow up as fuel to some sort of degree, right? They'll want their place in the world to demand authority that will be like, against all the haters, essentially, kind of thing, right? That's what you tend to see here. And I think with Mars and Capricorn, there is an aspect of this that they're really great business people. They're really great at, they might get a lot of mentorship from older people. They might get a lot of, their relationship with elders and people that are much older than them is probably quite prominent. And this is just something you'll see in Capricorn placements, because they have such a predisposition towards things that are older, because that's what Saturn is about, right? Saturn is about things that are older, things that are senior, things that are wiser, because they've lived longer, they've experienced more. And so Mars Capricorn wants to experience a lot of things, but it understands it can't experience 30 years of life in 2 years, right? It can't. It can feel that way, but there's a certain level of lessons that only time will be able to teach. And that's something that all Capricorn placements have to understand. But Mars understands that, and it's had to over time in Capricorn. And it understands it can only accomplish so much within a day. And I think that's something that I really admire about Mars and Capricorn, is they know that limit of when to stop within a day, right? That's kind of where Mars is kind of does really well, because it is the energy we utilize throughout a day-to-day kind of time span. And so it does really function well in knowing what needs to be done in a day and accomplishing what needs to be done in a day, and then also expanding that out, weeks, months, years, so on and so forth. So that's something I think is really, really cool. Now, the other thing I want to say about Capricorn in relation to Saturn is a Saturn return. So Saturn cycle works in technically cycles of 28. If you go a little bit more granular or divine it more, it goes into cycles of 7. So Saturn when you were born was where it was in its natal position. At the age of 7, it's going to be around the first quarter square. And then at the age of 14, it's going to be opposite itself. So kind of like a full moon, if you will. And then at 21, it'll be at the third quarter square, kind of closing square. And then finally at 28, it's going to be at that kind of pinnacle moment that it was when you were born. So kind of Saturn would have gone all the way around the zodiac at that point. And that time period around 28 is considered the Saturn return. And it is a very, very prominent time in a lot of people's kind of groundedness and what they're supposed to do, what they're here to do on Earth, what they're here to do, in their responsibility, in their career. There's a lot of things that tend to happen around that time that I think are really, really powerful and potent. And it's important to see what your Saturn sign is as a Mars in Capricorn, or any Capricorn placement for that matter, because your Saturn return will quite literally change your life a lot more than it would for someone that doesn't have as many Capricorn placements, right? So recognize that that's really important. I did do a podcast episode with another astrologer. I'm going to put that down below about the Saturn return and the Saturn cycles and how to address that. So that will be down below for you to check out if you're interested in that. And I think it's really important to, if you have someone you love with a Mars and Capricorn, right, to really inspire them to go after their goals and maybe not be as hard on themselves, right? It depends on what age they're at, right? Like allow them to experiment, allow them to explore, allow them outlets for their anger as well. Giving them ways to utilize their energy, giving them a good workout routine, giving them something that allows them to get that kind of energy out, allowing them to just go and do things, right? That's really going to help a lot of the situation. Now, I think it's also important to see, once again, the aspects to Mars, where Mars is at by house, different things like that to get a better idea of what else is going on. And that's why this series is part of this, is so you can kind of learn all these different things and kind of integrate them all differently into your own kind of birth chart. So yeah, if you have your Mars in Capricorn, be patient with yourself, be easier on yourself, don't be hard on yourself. You know what you're doing, you know how you're helping, but also make sure that there's really a lot more of an internal kind of introspective nature, right? Understanding where those motivations are coming from, and why you are striving, and why you are fighting, and what you're fighting for, you know, and who you want to become, right? That's what you'll tend to see. And it's important to kind of do a lot of the internal work as well as a Mars and Capricorn. Whenever you have Capricorn placements, there's so much externalized stuff naturally, but it's about bringing it back home and bringing it back to that inner world as well. So making sure you're aware of that part of you is, I think, one of the biggest assets, and how that motivates you, and that kind of informs what you're doing, right? I think that's really, really helpful. So that's it for Mars and Capricorn. If you like this, please let me know. Put a like down below, all those sorts of things. And I'll see you guys in the next part. We're talking about Mars in the 10th house. All right, so we have Mars in the 10th house. So Mars in the 10th house is going to be a little bit different than Mars in Capricorn, because Mars can be in any sign within the 10th house. Now, I've done pretty much every Mars video prior to this outside of Aquarius and Pisces. So I would recommend you watch all of those Mars videos, or any of those Mars videos rather, that you particularly have in the 10th house, because I am going to go over all of them here. Little brief kind of synopsis here. But I'm not really going to go super deep into that. But I recommend you watch the Mars video by sign first, before you watch the Mars video by house. Now, what I think is really unique about the way that Mars is in the 10th house is, when we put Mars in the 10th house, this is actually one of the fun fact about this one is, this is one of the specific things that astrologers and statistical analysts used to try and disprove slash prove astrology. And I believe it's called the Mars effect, but there's also like another statistical kind of name for it that you can look up, where it literally talks about where people would follow people that had Mars angular, meaning Mars at the top of the chart, and who they became in life. And I think the term for it, it's really called the Mars effect, and it's also talks about it's by Gauquelin, Gauquelin, and it's a statistical correlation between the athletic eminence and the position of the planet Mars relative to the horizon at time and place of birth. And so what this has to do is, if we have Mars at the top of the chart, it is statistically kind of been brought up that there is a correlation between people that have Mars up there, and they are athletes, they are doctors, they are lawyers, they are people that Mars wants to elevate because they are striving for something public. They are striving for something up there. And typically these are people who have a lot of athletic energy, athletic prowess. They are doctors. They are people that are pushing their limits and going and striving for something externally, right? And so that's something I think is really interesting. If you have Mars in the 10th, there's a whole study on that. And I think for the most part, separate of the Mars placement in the 10th house, you will be successful, because that's just kind of what Mars wants to do up there. Mars wants to be seen as the efforts are seen publicly, right? There's almost like you want to keep being brought up that way. So Mars will inherently kind of cause success in the 10th house. Granted, it's going to cause different types of success and different types of things up the top of the 10th house, but it is ultimately going to bring some sort of success in that regard. Now, when we think about Mars in the 10th, it is going to aggravate the career, aggravate bosses. There might be some definite boss issues, and kind of working for others, that might be a problem. There might be some interesting relationships with the father as well when Mars is at the top of the chart, because that father figure can be a really big motivating factor. And when we see Mars at the top of the chart, it also makes you have a career typically that is quite Martian in nature, right? People that are in the army can be very prominent here, especially if like Mars is in like a lunar sign, or if Mars is with the moon, and it's towards the top, or it's with Saturn towards the top. There could be aspects of this that Mars really wants to strive to protect something, strive to be in a place of a career that is Martian, right? That is, the army, that is a fighting kind of, career, right? Mars will want to do something. It'll want to cut, it'll want to sever, it'll want to fight. It wants a career that is inherently kind of difficult or fighty, right? And it's interesting because there's someone I know who has Mars Venus at the top of the chart, and what they literally do as a career is they are tattoo artists. And that's funny because Mars wants to cut, wants to sever, wants to harm, essentially, at the top of the chart. But then Venus wants to make it beautiful, right? Venus wants to make it pretty. So it's like, let's harm someone, but make it pretty, right? And that's where we see Mars and Venus towards the top of the chart kind of helping alleviate some of just Mars up there, right? If we just had just Mars up there, it would probably be someone who's a fighter, someone who wants to be a personal trainer, right? And that's funny because that's actually something else that this person had actually tried as well. So it's a lot of those lessons around really striving for bringing yourself, your Martian, your masculine, your kind of that energy towards the top of the chart, towards your career, right? So you'll find with Mars in the 10th, these are people that just have a lot of vitality, a lot of energy, a lot of goals, and they want to reach them, and they will as they work through their things. And that's relative to what Mars is doing in the top of the chart, what sign it's in, what aspects it has going on, what else is up there, right? Just like I just said, there's a lot of kind of importance of seeing the entire chart and what else is happening. Now, when Mars is at the top of the chart and it's in certain elements, it's going to do very differently than it would in other ones, right? Earlier I talked about Mars in Cancer at the top of the chart, and it's a very artistic career, right? When we think about Mars in a water sign, whether it's Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces at the top of the chart, these are going to be careers that are typically intuitive, artistic, sensitive in some sort of way. So if we have Mars in Cancer at the top, this can be someone who works in restaurant or something that's maternal in nature. As a chef can be really prominent with Mars in Cancer. I find that really prominent where Mars is put in the kitchen, right? Because Cancer rules like the kitchen in the home, and so it wants to cut in the home. So what does it do? It becomes a really good chef, right? If we have, Mars in Scorpio at the top of the chart, this is going to be a really prominent one as well, because Mars is going to, in its way, also protect the top of that chart, protect that career. So it's interesting because when we think about conflict and we think about family and the issues that, the family brings to our public life, right? I think what's interesting about Mars in the top of the chart in Scorpio is it's a lot about understanding the importance of those conflicts and integrating them and bringing them back up, bringing them to something of publicity in that regard. And I think Mars in Scorpio, you'll see this pretty prominent in people that are like law enforcement, first responders, people that have a lot of influence and power. And I think it's almost, when we see Mars there, it's like they have to get used to public conflict or public cutting or public kind of, not necessarily scrutiny, because that would be more of like Saturn, Mercury type of stuff, like public opinion. But Mars at the top in Scorpio makes me think of someone who has had to get used to being in conflict, who's had to consistently understand that that's part of their life. That's part of how people perceive that. People will just, when Mars is angular, and this is true for any Mars in the 10th, people just fight you. There'll just be conflict. It'll just create conflict. There'll be some sort of reaction. And it's about understanding how to respond in anger or not in anger, right? When to utilize your anger. That's something that I think is really powerful with Mars, is it brings up this idea of anger and this idea of anger management. And we have Mars angular at the top of the chart. This is a career that you need to integrate that to get further. You need to integrate your energy. And this is true for everybody. Like, everyone needs to be able to work on their goals and go after their things and yada, 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 to get to their goals in their life. But when Mars is up there, it makes it almost that battle, that fight is part of your career. It's part of your journey, and it becomes part of why you're doing what you're doing, right? So if we see Mars in Scorpio at the top, once again, this could be great for detectives, great for police officers, for military, but more so detectives, surgeons as well can be really prominent up here at the top of the chart. And then we have Mars in Pisces up there. This is very intuitive, very psychic. There's a lot of working with hospitals in that regard. So all the Mars in water, there's this intuitive sense with that. I typically do Mars in a little bit different order, but I guess today I'm doing it in the elements, which is pretty fun. I like this layout a little bit when I talk about it this way. Now, moving on from Mars and water, which are all going to have this kind of like quality of, intuition with them. Like Mars in Cancer is going to be working with, the family to some degree and the kind of intuitive essence of the family. And then Mars in Scorpio is working with very powerful people, or occult things, very powerful information, very dark things. And then, Mars in Pisces is going to work with things that are esoteric, that are different, that are mediumship, that are, hospitals, that are unseen. Very creative in that regard as well. There's a lot of creativity across the board with Mars and water at the top of the chart. Now, if you put Mars in a fire sign, the top of the chart, we're going to have Mars in Aries top of the chart. We're going to have Mars in Leo or Mars in Sagittarius. Now, all of these, Mars in Aries, so much like Mars in Scorpio, it's going to kind of protect that 10th house. It's going to make the 10th house something that you have to get used to the conflict, get used to the use of energy, get used to the routine, get used to the fighting and the consistent kind of hustle and bustle. But then Mars is like, okay, you're used to it. Let's keep going. This is what you strive in, right? So you think about this as like someone who is kind of like a daredevil, who just loves to be in some sort of chaos, but in a way that it's like ER doctors, right? That's kind of also Mars Scorpio at the top too. But I find that a lot with Cancer risings that have Mars and Aries at the top of the chart, and they're Gen Z. That's very specific. Sorry, very specific. But those are the ones that typically work in like hospitals or like really intense like work situations. With Mars and Aries up there, but it is someone that Mars will want you to have a very physically a lot of health that you're using. And so it is really successful with Mars and Aries, and the one friend I know who has that is really, really successful because of that. And then Mars in Leo at the top of the chart, this is going to be the one that wants to be seen for who they are. And this is where you'll have a little bit more of the scrutiny, right? And I know I said the public scrutiny would come more with like a Mars, Mercury thing, Mercury at the top, Saturn at the top, but Mars in Leo at the top, as well as Mars in Aquarius, they both are going to have that kind of like audience kind of annoyance, needing to show up and show yourself and kind of be proud of who you are and fight for that light. Mars and Leo at the top can be a little bit difficult because it is going to kind of create this fight within expressing yourself, right? And the sun loves to be the top of the chart. Leo loves to be up there, right? So it's like I'm fighting to be seen. I'm fighting for my place. People are always fighting my expression, right? And so Mars and Leo at the top, there's a lot of like creative outlets that would really help them. These are really great artists, like really great artists, people that take that scrutiny and create it into something really, really powerful and potent and beautiful. They would have a really beautiful life when they understand that conflict fuels their creativity, fuels who they are, and allows them to see who they are more fully. So there's a lot of career in arts there, and career in childlike protection too. So like CPS can be a part of that as well. If Mars is, also with like Saturn in some way, by aspect, something that could have been there too. And then Mars in Sag at the top of the chart. So Mars in Sag, this is going to have philosopher energy. A fiery midheaven is like always really, really fun. Like it's going to be fun. Like it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of activity, a lot of energy. This can be another daredevil energy up here. Mars in Aries and Mars in Sag can have this daredevil energy. Mars and Leo can have it too, but it's more because they want themselves to be like the ones that are seen for that, right? They want to be able to put on their name, right? Kind of their reputation. And that's the thing. Mars will always have the reputation be somewhat of a conflict in the top of the 10th house. The reputation is going to kind of have this kind of like issue where people are not really going to like the way you're perceived, you're putting yourself out in public. And that's true for Mars in any sign up there. It's going to cause your public perception is going to cause, or how people receive you publicly is going to cause some conflict, whether within them or whether with like towards you. So Mars at the top of the chart can definitely cause some public scrutiny, public issues, public cancel culture is very like Mars 10th Like, it's not saying that's you being canceled all the time, but it's like, it's very much that energy. It's like Mars at the top of the chart. It's very much that. But Mars and Sag is all about teaching, learning. It's really, that's something I think is really positive. And I think people, it's weird because like Mars and Sag can almost be annoyed by, it can be doing so well. This is the thing, I think it's really interesting. We put Mars at the top of the chart. Some of the time with Mars at the top of the chart, it does well. Like, it just inherently does well, even if it is, like I said, in Cancer. But it almost like their success annoys people, right? Mars and Sag, it's like you're traveling all over the world, like, that annoys people, right? Because they're not you, right? That's interesting. Like, I think that's part of what Mars does in the 10th. It's almost like it creates this, like, people, like, a lot of haters. Like I said earlier, like, it's a lot of haters. And then, anyway, moving on from Mars and Fire. Mars and Fire just kind of, it motivates people as well. So, like, your actions will motivate people more when you have Mars in general at the top, but Mars and Fire at the top will kind of inherently make people want to work harder around you. So I think it's really beautiful. And there's a lot of like imprinting of like striving, like striving for career that is kind of imprinted upon you with that. And then we have Mars in an air sign. So we have Mars in Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. So Mars in these signs at the top of the chart is really fun because it's a social one, right? It's not necessarily a fire one where it's going to do a bunch of stuff. Yeah, it will still do stuff because it's Mars. But at the top of the chart, it's like, it's going to do a lot of talking. It's going to have a lot of opinions. This is where I think Mars Gemini at the top is going to have probably the most scrutiny out of any of them from their colleagues and coworkers. Mars and Virgo will have this too, but that's a little bit different. Mars and Gemini, I think, is going to get probably the most back talk from people and the most gossip about them. But it's about how they use that, they turn that. They could be journalists, they could be really great investigative journalists as well with Mars at the top of the chart there. They could be great teachers, they could be like the top of their school, meaning like they are teachers in the school district and they're at the top of their school. They could be principals, they could be, school board members. There's something around that. And that's similar also to Mars and Leo, but not in the same way. Mars and Gemini has more of a kind of protection around intellectual property. So there could be like an intellectual property, like lawyer. There's something around that too. Mars and Libra has that too with law. But there's also this kind of quality with Mars and Gemini at the top of like a lot of writing, like a lot of aggressive writing. So there could be a lot of writers that have Gemini Mars at the top of the chart. Drivers, like race car drivers, could be a part of that. It's really interesting. Mars and Gemini as a career indicator is really interesting, and there's a lot there. So if you have Mars and Gemini at the top of the chart, I'd love to hear your story and what that has been for you, because it's kind of like has its hands in a bunch of different things. And Mars and Gemini, I personally don't like the way Mars and Gemini moves because it kind of is just, it's annoying to me personally. That's just because of how I am and my biases. But I find that Mars and Gemini does have a lot of different things in its hand at all at the same times, and that can do really, really well for them. So there's kind of like this jack of all trades energy with Gemini at the top of the chart with Mars there as well. I think it's really, really prominent, and I really like it. And I'm really curious. There's a lot of curiosity and kind of like fighting that curiosity and figuring that out. There's a lot of like mental work as well. Yeah. So that one. Mars and Libra at the top of the chart. Lawyers for sure. This is very lawyer energy. And then also like domestic issues, domestic kind of disagreements. Marriage family counselors can be a part of that, as well as any of the Mars and water can kind of have that kind of counseling and like energy. Mars and air is going to have a lot more of just like the talkative PR, HR, communicative jobs. They're just doing a lot of speaking, a lot of writing, a lot of emails. It's a lot of what you'll see, especially more so with Mars and Gemini than anything. A lot of jobs that are just talking and emails and writing and all that. Mailmen, right? That's the thing. You could be like top bus driver, right? Whatever. Very, very Mars Gemini could be that as well at the top. And Mars Libra has that too, but this is more on the relational side of stuff. So this could be someone who is a talent agent for people, who's helping other people kind of navigate their own careers, kind of assisting in legal spaces, assisting in modeling spaces, kind of helping put things together. Consultancy is really big for Libra midheavens. Being able to do something that is beautiful, that is helping another person. And Mars up there can make that who you work with very difficult, and finding the right person to bring you to the top But I think it's about finding that right person, and you'll inevitably find them, but it just takes time to get there. And that's why the Venus support is really important. The Venus placement is very important for that as well, with Mars and Libra, to see what that's doing at the top of the chart, because it wants you to work with a partner and a business partner and help you build something. But it's finding that right person that aligns with that vision and working with someone. So there could be a lot of contracts as well that you could work with, a lot of like collaborative work that you are asked to do to get to your goals, to be part of it there. And then Mars in Aquarius, this one's really fun and quirky and weird. But this is where you'll see fighting for advocacy for refugees, online social media stuff. This is where... So this is interesting because Mars in Aquarius, I said earlier that Mars can be cancel culture-esque in the 10th house, as well as Mars in the 11th house. But Mars in the 10th house can have, in Aquarius specifically, can kind of run groups. There could be a group leadership there. There's a really strong energy with Mars in Aquarius at the top of the chart of running a group that is able to help other people, but it also can run hate groups, right? They could run hate groups as well as running motivational groups. And I think that's where Mars in Aquarius needs to really understand the audience, right? That's what Mars in Aquarius, the whole lesson is all about. It's understand the audience, how to work with them, how to work with their desires. And so I think that's really interesting. There's a lot of echo chamber kind of stuff going on with Mars in Aquarius. A lot of like being around the same voices, the same opinions, but also trying to help them. This one's really unique. I don't know many off the top of my head. Mars Aquarius is in 10th house that are that unique. But there is a sense of like, meaning I don't know any personally that I can kind of like get examples out. But I know Mars in Aquarius is very unique. And it's about them trying to find the right audience and trying to find the right people. And there is a sense of running a group or running some sort of event that can be really successful. They could be really great event organizers and just advocates for different things. Mars in Aquarius is really strong in that regard. So yeah, Mars in Air in just general is just very social, very successful in regards to the kind of interpersonal, relational kind of dynamics, because they've had to work with that. That's what Mars really wants them to do, is understand how to work with someone or with multiple people or with different opinions and things like that, different viewpoints, stuff like that. So yeah. And then finally, Mars and Earth, so Mars, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. These are going to be the more motivated by the financial stuff, which is totally valid, totally fair. And they're going to be motivated, and they're going to want to fight for something that is stable, secure. Mars and Taurus in the 10th, this could be someone who is like very specific, very niche, but like a miner. Like I don't know if those are, I'm sure those are jobs, but like working in mining fields, working in agriculture could be a really big thing with this. Working in restaurants, working in anything that's jewelry based. There could be a sense of working with jewels, working with fine gems or fine art with Mars and Taurus, as well as Mars and Libra can have that too, but it's a little bit different. Mars and Libra is more of like the social kind of part of it, but Mars and Libra also can have, kind of go back there for a second, Mars and Libra can also have more of that social kind of cancel culture thing there. All of the Mars air, I think, can have that the most, where they're getting the most like critiques and stuff about how they're explaining themselves in that regard. Anywho, back to Mars and Taurus. Mars and Taurus, there's a sense here. Yeah, there's a lot of like, y'all Mars 10th house people, y'all get like critiqued like nobody's business. It's kind of crazy to like tap into all of these and kind of see what's going on. But yeah, Mars and Taurus at the 10th, like I said, there's like a fine art jeweler thing, but there is a sense of scrutiny from others. There's a sense of weird, like, perceived privilege from other people with Mars and Taurus at the top of the chart. Really weird to me, but not... It's like you fought to get where you are, but then people only see the end result, and then they therefore attack you, right? Kind of weird. Anywho, that's interesting. Yeah, if you have Mars and Taurus, I'd love to hear that as well. Mars in Virgo at the top of the chart. This is like doctors, medicine, healers. These are probably the more prominent ones that I would see are more prone to being like a life coach, or specifically a physical fitness, like influencer, or physical fitness, like kind of, what's that called? Like, personal trainer, like someone that is doing that consistently and helping someone, making a career out of that and improving them. A dietitian, yoga instructor, any sort of teacher that is doing something publicly in that regard can be very, very great in a lot of ways. Mars at the top of the chart for Virgo in there can do really, really well. Then we have Mars in Capricorn. Well, the other thing, kind of run back to Mars and Virgo really quick. Mars and Virgo at the top of the chart, there is a sense of needing to make sure you have a goal in mind of what you're doing it for, your long-term vision. That's what I think is really important with Mars in any Virgo placement has that importance. And I talked about that with Mars and Virgo for sure. So I'd recommend, like I said earlier, to watch the Mars videos as well. To get a better idea of what Mars does, and specifically your sign, in addition to this part with Mars in the 10th. And then finally, Mars and Capricorn. Mars and Capricorn, I've talked about this for a while. Mars and Capricorn in the 10th, this is like a super strong Mars. And this is where you would, also it's super strong because you are Martian. You are an Aries rising with this chart more than likely. And so you are going to need to really understand your own motivations. And this is a really strong one. If you're an Aries rising with the Capricorn Mars, that's power right there. That is inherently a lot of power because you are ruled by Mars and you are in the 10th and you are successful. You are the boss. You are the one that owns the company. You are a lot of stuff. But once again, like I had said earlier, with Mars and Capricorn, it's important to reassess and reevaluate that inner kind of motivations and why you're getting there, why you're fighting for that, right? That's something I think is really important. The other thing I wanted to say, if you are a Mars in Leo as well at the top of the chart, that is going to be your chart ruler as well because you are a Scorpio rising. So that is also really unique because it means that Mars is your chart ruler, meaning that you yourself are going to the 10th house. So you are really, really prominently brought into career, brought into leadership, similar to the Mars and Aries Capricorn there's a lot of you being brought up. And I think there's a lot there with, I think the reason why Mars and Leo get so much scrutiny is also because they are inherent, Mars and Leo in the 10th specifically gets so much scrutiny is because they are also a Scorpio rising. So they get a lot of that kind of issue, and they're also ruled by that Mars in the 10th. So there's a lot of public scrutiny specifically with Mars and Leo. It's about how you utilize that, how you accept that, how you work with that, how you change that and transmute that. So something else I wanted to just add in there, but overall Mars in the 10th has a lot of power, a lot of striving, a lot of success that it goes towards, and it's really, really about how you utilize that, how you keep fighting, keep striving, keep getting used to the conflict that is part of that kind of come up, right? Really beautiful, really amazing. I really truly love to see Mars at the top of the chart, or just even up there in general. It has a lot of success and a lot of things it will inherently give to that person. And it's about being able to understand and fight through whatever conflict that might be. Mars also is more successful when you are a day chart person. I'm sorry, a night chart person. My bad. Reverse that. A night chart person, meaning that if you're born during the day, Saturn is going to be more beneficial as opposed to more destructive. And then if you're born at night, Mars is going to be more beneficial as opposed to more destructive. So it is going to actually help you a lot more if you're born at night than being born during the day, because Mars will help a lot of those things. It'll be stronger at night. So that's part of it too. Really, really important to think about. But yeah, and also, of course, if you have Mars retrograde, there's an aspect of that that's important to bring up. And those are all other things that we'd have to look at in the actual chart if we were to go into deeper, because this is just like a one-off talking about one placement. And so I really hope this did help anyone and everyone that came across this. Mars in the 10th is quite a fun placement, as well as Mars in Capricorn. But Mars in the 10th, I find, there's a lot more to talk about when we think about kind of the nuances of all the different signs in the 10th house. And I think it's really cool to see. So I'm really grateful to be able to do this. I love doing this series. If this video helped literally any of you, please put a like down there. Please comment. Let me know what your thoughts are, what your specific placement is. I'd love to hear about it. I love doing this. This is what I do literally for a living, for every day. And this is part of a huge series I've been working on. I'm so grateful to be able to do it. And we're almost on the final stretch. We have a couple more seasons to do. We have Aquarius and Pisces after Capricorn season, and then we are done. And that's super exciting. And yeah, and I really love being able to do this. If you guys like the way that I talk, you guys like the way that I come across, feel free to check out down below all of my other videos, as well as if you want to get a reading with me, there's stuff down there to kind of check that out as well. So I appreciate you for sitting through this. You're very patient, Mars 10th house person. Keep striving, keep going after your goals, keep pushing towards your things. You're going to get things done, I promise. And just be patient with yourself. Be patient with the world to catch up to you as well. And accept where you're going and keep pushing, keep going. And I believe in you, and you got to believe in you and keep on going. And you got this. Talk to you soon. Bye.